The year is 1781. The American Revolutionary War has raged for 6 long years. Blood has been spilled, battles won and lost, but the fate of a nation still hangs in the balance. Across the Atlantic, King George III remains determined to keep his rebellious colonies under British rule. Yet, in the humid fields of Virginia, a dramatic confrontation is about to unfold, one that will change the course of history. This is the story of how British General Charles Cornwallis found himself trapped, outmaneuvered, and forced to surrender to General George Washington at the Battle of Yorktown. Our tale begins not on the battlefield, but in the tangled web of strategy, politics, and sheer fortune that led two great armies to this decisive moment, the war before Yorktown. By 1781, the Revolutionary War had reached a critical point. The British, though still powerful, were stretched thin across the American colonies. Their strategy had shifted. Instead of crushing the rebellion in the north, they turned their attention to the south, hoping to rally loyalist support and divide the colonies. General Charles Cornwallis, a seasoned and ambitious commander, had scored victories in Charleston and Camden, yet his aggressive campaign also left his forces exhausted and overextended. Meanwhile, George Washington's Continental Army, though battered, remained resilient. With the help of French allies, men, ships, and supplies, Washington saw an opportunity to strike a decisive blow. Cornwallis moves into Virginia. In the spring of 1781, Cornwallis marched his army into Virginia, believing it was the key to ending the rebellion. He clashed with American forces under the Marquis de Lafayette, but failed to deliver a knockout blow. Instead, he found himself bogged down, his supply lines vulnerable. Unbeknownst to Cornwallis, a dangerous trap was being set. Washington, along with French General Rochambeau, made a bold decision. Instead of attacking the British stronghold in New York, they would march south, combining forces with Lafayette to corner Cornwallis, the French Navy's critical role. But armies alone could not decide this battle. The French fleet, under Admiral de Grasse, played the most unexpected and crucial role. Sailing from the Caribbean, de Grasse's ships arrived at the Chesapeake Bay just in time to block British reinforcements. When the Royal Navy attempted to break through, they were repelled in the Battle of the Chesapeake, a naval clash that sealed Cornwallis's fate. Now, with Washington's army closing in from the land and the French fleet controlling the sea, Cornwallis was surrounded. His once confident army dug in at the small port town of Yorktown, unaware that they were standing on the stage where the war's final act would play out. As the noose tightened around Yorktown, Cornwallis faced an impossible choice: fight against overwhelming odds or surrender in disgrace. Meanwhile, Washington, the once untested commander, stood on the brink of an unthinkable victory. But the battle was far from over. Trenches would be dug, cannons would roar, and brave men on both sides would face the horrors of siege warfare. The fate of a nation rested on what happened next. September the 28th, 1781. The air over Yorktown is thick with tension. General Charles Cornwallis and his 8,000 British and Hessian troops are dug in, surrounded on all sides. To the east, the French fleet blocks any hope of escape or reinforcement by sea. To the west, the combined forces of George Washington's Continental Army and the French under General Rochambeau advance, their cannons rolling into position. The noose is tightening. The siege of Yorktown, the last major battle of the American Revolution, has begun. George Washington knew this was his best, and possibly last, chance to win the war. For years, the Continental Army had fought a desperate struggle against the British Empire, surviving on grit, luck, and foreign aid. Now, with French soldiers, artillery, and naval power at his side, Washington moved with precision. Under cover of darkness, American and French engineers began digging the first siege trenches, creeping ever closer to the British lines. Their goal? To bring their heavy guns within range and bombard Cornwallis into submission. The British, realizing what was happening, fired flares into the night, lighting up the landscape as cannonballs and musket shots rang out. But the Allied forces pressed on. Cornwallis's fatal mistake. Cornwallis had chosen Yorktown for its access to the sea, expecting the Royal Navy to keep his supply lines open. But when the French fleet defeated the British at the Battle of the Chesapeake, his fate was sealed. Now, cut off from reinforcements and low on supplies, he made a critical error. He abandoned his outer defenses, pulling his men back into the town itself. This decision gave Washington's forces the perfect opportunity to move their artillery forward. By October 9th, the first Allied guns were in place. At precisely 3 p.m., a single French cannon fired the opening shot of the bombardment. Then, the sky erupted in thunder as dozens of cannons unleashed hell upon the British positions. The horror of the bombardment. For days, the relentless barrage continued. Buildings collapsed, trenches caved in, and men were torn apart by flying shrapnel. British soldiers, exhausted and starving, huddled in crumbling earthworks, praying for relief that would never come. Cornwallis, desperate, sent out a desperate plea for help to General Henry Clinton in New York. But Clinton, slow to act, would not arrive in time. With each passing hour, the British position grew more hopeless. As the earth shook under the weight of cannon fire, Cornwallis faced the grim reality. There would be no glorious last stand, no daring rescue. His army was crumbling, and yet the worst was still to come. For Washington was preparing a final, devastating assault that would break the British lines once and for all. October 14, 1781. Under the cover of a moonless night, hundreds of soldiers move silently through the trenches. Their faces are smeared with dirt, their bayonets fixed. The constant thunder of cannon fire has paused just for this moment. Ahead lies the last major British defensive position, two fortified redoubts, bristling with muskets and artillery. If these fall, Yorktown itself will be defenseless. This is Washington's final gamble, a daring night attack that could end the war. The plan takes shape. Washington knew that a prolonged siege could still fail. The British Navy might regroup. Reinforcements might arrive from New York. Time was against him. His solution? A surprise assault on redoubts 9 and 10, the twin anchors of Cornwallis's inner defenses. The mission was entrusted to two elite forces. Redoubt 10, 400 American light infantry under Alexander Hamilton, the young, ambitious aide-de-camp Washington once doubted but now relied upon. Redoubt 9, 400 French grenadiers led by the Comte de Dupont, hardened veterans of European warfare. Their orders were clear: no gunfire, only bayonets. A single shot could alert the entire British garrison. Blood in the darkness. At 8 p.m., the attack began. Hamilton's assault. The Americans rushed Redoubt 10, hacking through sharpened wooden stakes, abatis with axes. British sentries shouted in alarm, but it was too late. Hamilton's men vaulted into the trenches, bayonets flashing. A brutal, silent struggle ensued in the dark. Within minutes, the redoubt was taken. The French attack. At Redoubt 9, the fighting was even fiercer. The British and Hessian defenders unleashed a volley of musket fire, but the French grenadiers charged through the smoke, overwhelming the defenses in hand-to-hand combat. By 10 p.m., both redoubts were in Allied hands. The British inner line had been shattered. Cornwallis's desperate gamble. As dawn broke on October 15th, Cornwallis stared at the new reality. Enemy cannons would soon be close enough to level Yorktown. In a last, futile attempt, he ordered a pre-dawn counterattack on the captured redoubts. It failed miserably. That same night, he made another reckless move, loading his best troops onto boats to try a desperate escape across the York River. But a sudden storm scattered the vessels, drowning some and forcing the rest back. The British Army was now out of options. As the sun rose on October 16th, the British flag still flew over Yorktown, but not for long. Washington's artillery, now just hundreds of yards away, began its final, merciless bombardment. Buildings exploded, trenches collapsed, and in his headquarters, Cornwallis faced the unthinkable: surrender. The next 24 hours would decide not just the fate of his army, but the birth of a nation. British General Cornwallis surrenders to George Washington at the Battle of Yorktown. October 17, 1781. A single drummer boy emerges from the British lines at Yorktown, his rhythmic beats cutting through the smoke-filled air. Behind him, an officer waves a white handkerchief tied to a musket. After 9 days of relentless siege, General Cornwallis has reached his breaking point. The most powerful army in the world is about to capitulate to rebel forces, an unthinkable humiliation for the British crown. But the surrender will not be simple. Pride, protocol, and the raw wounds of war will shape every tense negotiation that follows. The first parley. At 10 a.m., a British officer blindfolded with a handkerchief is led through the American lines. He carries Cornwallis's request for a 24-hour ceasefire to discuss terms. Washington's reply is firm. Only unconditional surrender will be accepted. Yet Washington knows political symbolism matters as much as military victory. He allows two aides, Colonel John Lawrence, an American, and the Viscount de Noailles, a French officer related to Lafayette, to draft the formal articles. The document demands the surrender of all British troops at Yorktown, the handing over of arms and colors, regimental flags, the parole, conditional release of officers, but imprisonment for rank-and-file soldiers. Baroness Cornwallis' shame. Cornwallis is furious. He argues his men should receive the same generous terms the British granted American forces at Charleston the previous year. Washington refuses. The British general, suffering from stress-induced illness, cannot bring himself to personally surrender. Instead, he sends his second-in-command, General Charles O'Hara. A calculated insult? On October 19th, O'Hara attempts to surrender to the French General Rochambeau first. A sly nod to European military tradition that aristocrats should receive surrender from equals. Rochambeau redirects him to Washington. The American commander, in turn, forces O'Hara to surrender to his second-in-command, General Benjamin Lincoln, the very officer humiliated at Charleston. The articles are sealed. The final terms are brutal for British pride. Their musicians must play a British or German march, not a triumphant anthem. Officers keep their sidearms but surrender their swords. The entire garrison, over 7,000 men, will march out in disgrace. Cornwallis signs the document, then retires to his tent without attending the formal ceremony. He will later claim to be too ill to witness his army's humiliation. As ink dries on the surrender documents, both sides prepare for the most theatrical moment of the war, the ceremonial march of the defeated British Army. But in the ranks, emotions run raw. Some British officers vow to break their swords rather than surrender them. Hessian mercenaries weep openly, and, watching from the American lines, a young private named Joseph Plum Martin will later write, "We could not but pity them. The world is about to witness a scene that will echo through history." 5. The March of the Vanquished, a humiliation etched in history. October 19, 1781, noon. The sun hangs high over Yorktown as two parallel lines of soldiers form a gauntlet nearly a mile long. To one side stand the victorious Americans, their uniforms patched but proud. To the other, the immaculate French forces in white uniforms with gleaming bayonets. Between them, the defeated British and Hessian troops must now march, their colors cased, their weapons soon to be surrendered. This is no mere formality. It is a psychological masterpiece orchestrated by Washington, designed to break the spirit of the British Empire itself, the theater of defeat. Washington had planned every detail for maximum symbolic impact. The French and American troops stand in perfect formation, creating a corridor of shame for the British. Civilians gather on nearby hills, witnessing history unfold. British drummers and fifers like the world turned upside down, an ironic choice possibly suggested by American officers. Eyewitness accounts describe surreal moments. A British officer tears the gold braid from his uniform rather than surrender it. Hessian mercenaries hurl their muskets into piles with such force the stocks shatter. One redcoat bites his cartridge in half, a final symbolic act of defiance. The missing sword. As General O'Hara approaches Benjamin Lincoln to offer Cornwallis's sword, an astonishing breach of protocol occurs. 1. O'Hara extends the sword to Lincoln. 2. Lincoln gestures toward Washington. 3. Washington refuses to accept it from a subordinate, ordering it be returned to Cornwallis. 4. The sword is born and never formally surrendered. It remains with the British in a stunning rejection of tradition. This calculated snub sends a clear message. The Americans make their own rules now. Breaking point. The human toll becomes apparent as British surgeons carry bleeding wounded through the lines. A Hessian drummer boy collapses in tears, comforted by a French officer. Cornwallis's personal servant is seen burning the general's papers, including damning letters about his failures. As the last British troops lay down their arms, an eerie silence falls over Yorktown. The victors do not cheer. The defeated do not weep. Even nature seems to pause. The wind dies, and the James River grows still. In London, King George III will soon receive the news and reportedly whisper, "Oh God, it is all over." But here, on this field, something far greater than an empire's pride has been lost. The very idea of invincible British rule in America lies shattered in the Virginia dirt. Yet one question remains. How will the world react to this impossible victory? Echoes of victory. The world turned upside down. October 20th, 1781. The smoke has barely cleared at Yorktown when a Continental cavalryman spurs his horse northward, carrying news that will electrify a nation. But the ink on the surrender documents is still wet, and already contradictions emerge. Though history will remember this as the war's end, fighting actually continues for 2 more years. The true impact of Yorktown lies not in its bullets, but in its psychological earthquake, one that topples empires, births a nation, and leaves even the victors stunned by what they've achieved. The first messenger. Tennessee-born Lieutenant Tench Tillman rides 200 miles to Philadelphia in just 4 days, collapsing at the doorstep of the Continental Congress. His message triggers spontaneous celebrations. Church bells ring all night in Philadelphia, but Congress hesitates to announce victory, fearing British reinforcements might still arrive. The global shockwave. Across the Atlantic, reactions reveal the battle's true significance. In London, Prime Minister Lord North receives the news as if he had taken a bullet to the chest, reportedly repeating, "Oh God, it's all over." In Paris, Benjamin Franklin uses Yorktown to force faster peace negotiations, telling the French, "Our baby republic has teeth." In New York, a furious General Clinton burns secret correspondence showing he delayed Cornwallis's rescue to protect his own reputation. The paradox of peace. For soldiers on the ground, Yorktown changes little at first. Washington keeps the army mobilized for 18 more months. Fearing British treachery, British forces still occupy New York, Charleston, and Savannah. Skirmishes continue along the frontier, including a bloody battle in Ohio just weeks later. Yet the psychological shift is irreversible. When peace negotiations begin in Paris, British diplomats find they're no longer bargaining with rebels, but with equals. September 3rd, 1783. 2 years after Yorktown, American and British diplomats sign the Treaty of Paris in a room filled with tension. The document refers to His Britannic Majesty, recognizing the said United States. 7 words that erase a decade of bloodshed. Back in America, Washington will soon surprise the world again by resigning his commission rather than seizing power. And Cornwallis? He returns to England in disgrace, only to later become Governor General of India. History has a cruel sense of humor. As for the ordinary soldiers who stood in those Yorktown trenches, most fade into obscurity, their names lost to time. But the republic they birthed will endure, flawed but unbroken, its destiny set in motion on that October day when the world truly turned upside down. Final words. This concludes our 6-part series on the Siege of Yorktown. From the first trenches to the final diplomatic triumph, we've traced how 20 days in Virginia changed the course of history. The past unfolded will return with more stories from the shadows of history, where fortune favors the bold and even empires can be undone by a single moment of hubris.